The coffee in her trembling hands had gone cold, but Sarah hadn't noticed. She'd been sitting in the corner of Morrison's cafe for 3 hours, nursing the same cup, her laptop open but blank. Outside, the Chicago winter pressed against the windows like an unwelcome visitor, and inside, the afternoon crowd had swelled to capacity. She knew she should leave. The looks from the barista had grown sharper with each passing hour, but she had nowhere else to go. The eviction notice was folded in her coat pocket, a piece of paper that had transformed her entire world in 24 hours. 3 months of unpaid rent. Her landlord's patience had finally run out. Last night, she'd slept in her car until the cold became unbearable, then she'd come here, to this warm cafe where she'd once celebrated job promotions and first dates, back when life made sense. "Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to leave." The manager's voice cut through her fog. He was younger than her, maybe 25, with the kind of polished confidence that comes from never having slept in a car. "You've been here for hours with one purchase. We have paying customers waiting." Sarah looked around. Every table was indeed full. People were standing by the door, stamping snow from their boots, eyeing the seats hungrily. She began gathering her things with shaking hands, her cheeks burning with shame. The other patrons pretended not to watch, but she felt their eyes anyway. "I'm sorry, I'll just..." Her laptop slipped from her grasp, clattering to the floor. The cafe went quiet. "Let's go. Now." The manager's hand closed around her upper arm, not violently, but firmly. He began steering her toward the door. Sarah's vision blurred with tears. This was it, the final indignity. Being dragged out of a coffee shop like a criminal because she couldn't afford to keep buying drinks she didn't want. Through the window, she could see her car, that old Honda Civic that was now her only home, covered in a fresh layer of snow. "Wait." A voice from the back of the cafe, deep and clear. "Wait just a minute." The manager stopped. Sarah wiped her eyes, trying to see who had spoken. A man stood up from one of the coveted window seats, the best spot in the house, where the radiator kept you warm and you could watch the city go by. He was perhaps 60, with silver hair and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. He wore a simple wool coat and scarf, nothing fancy, but he carried himself with a quiet dignity. "She can have my seat," he said, walking toward them. "I was just leaving anyway." "Sir, that's not really the point," the manager began. "Then what is the point?" the man asked gently. "You need tables for paying customers. I'm giving you one, and I'll buy the young lady's next coffee." He turned to Sarah, and something in his expression, understanding without pity, made her throat tighten. "What would you like?" I can't," Sarah whispered. "You don't have to." "I know I don't have to. I want to." He smiled. "We all need a warm place to sit sometimes. Especially in weather like this." The manager released her arm, looking uncertain. The cafe full of strangers watched this strange transaction unfold. "A regular coffee would be wonderful," Sarah finally said, her voice barely audible. "Thank you." The man ordered her coffee and a turkey sandwich. "You look like you could use some food," he said kindly, and insisted she take his seat. As she settled into the warm spot by the window, he gathered his own belongings, a worn book, a newspaper, reading glasses. "I'm Daniel, by the way," he said. "Sarah. Nice to meet you, Sarah. Enjoy your coffee." And then he was heading for the door. "Wait." She stood up quickly. Can I at least pay you back someday? Can I have your number or email or?" Daniel paused at the door, snow already beginning to dust his shoulders. "No need. But if you want to do something, just remember this feeling. And someday, when you're back on your feet, and you will be, pass it along to someone else who needs it." Then he was gone, disappearing into the white Chicago afternoon. Sarah sat back down, staring at the hot coffee and sandwich in front of her. The other customers had returned to their conversations, the moment already fading into the background noise of the cafe. But for Sarah, everything had changed. She pulled out her phone and, for the first time in days, started making calls. A former colleague who might know about job openings. A friend she'd been too ashamed to reach out to. A social services office that could point her toward temporary housing assistance. The kindness of a stranger had broken something open inside her, not just gratitude, but a spark of hope she'd thought was extinguished. That seat by the window became her headquarters. She spent the afternoon and evening there, sipping her coffee, eating her sandwich, rebuilding. The manager didn't bother her again. 3 months later, Sarah sat in a different cafe, this one near her new apartment, small, but hers. She had a job now, working in the legal department of a nonprofit that helped prevent wrongful evictions. It wasn't what she'd done before, but it mattered more. Every family she helped stay in their home felt like paying forward what Daniel had given her. She was reading the newspaper when she saw the obituary. The photo caught her eye first, those kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. Daniel Morrison, 67, longtime owner of Morrison's Cafe, passed away peacefully. The words blurred. Morrison. He'd owned the cafe. That seat he'd given her, the one she'd occupied for hours while she'd put her life back together, it hadn't just been any seat. It had been his. Sarah read on, tears streaming down her face. Daniel Morrison, known for his generosity and quiet service to his community. He'd sold the cafe 5 years earlier to fund scholarships for students who couldn't afford college. He'd volunteered at homeless shelters. He'd spent his life giving people seats at tables they thought they'd never reach. And on what she now realized must have been one of his last visits to the cafe he'd built, he'd given her his seat. Not because he had to. Not for recognition or reward. But because he'd seen someone who needed kindness, and he'd had kindness to give. Sarah sat in that cafe for a long time, thinking about Daniel. About how one moment of grace from a stranger had changed the trajectory of her entire life. About how he'd never know what his gesture had meant, what it had sparked. Then she noticed a young man at the counter, counting out change with trembling hands, coming up short for his coffee. The barista was shaking her head. Sarah stood up and walked over. "I've got it," she said, pulling out her wallet. "And get him a sandwich too. To go." The young man looked at her with surprise and relief and shame all mixed together, a look she recognized. "Thank you," he said. "Can I pay you back?" Sarah smiled, thinking of Daniel. "No need. Just pass it along someday." As she walked back to her seat, she felt Daniel's presence like a warm hand on her shoulder. The seat of honor wasn't about where you sat. It was about remembering that everyone deserves dignity, warmth, and a second chance. It was about giving what you could, when you could, without counting the cost. And somewhere, she liked to think, Daniel Morrison was smiling.